Imagine a virus is spreading throughout your community, affecting more than 20% of the population.
The breaking news is coming to us out of Connecticut, the southwestern part of that state, where police are reporting that they are responding to reports of a shooting at Newtown Elementary School early this morning. Again, in the southwestern part of Connecticut.
It doesn't even seem real. It just does not seem like it's even possible. It's like you read it in the paper or see it in the news, you're like, oh my God, that poor family. And then you have something happen so close to home. It's like, I think I'm still in shock, to be honest with you.
We send our kids off to school every day. This is the worst thing, the worst news that we can get.
This virus is complex. It has the potential to rob the health of all those it touches, impacting their nutrition, brain development, emotional well-being, and ultimately longevity. In some, its influence will be subtle, nearly invisible. In others, its effect will be powerful and readily apparent.
Yeah, this is the greatest fear, Don, you could possibly have. I mean, but if you just watch our culture, it seems like we're eroding away. You can't take your children to the movie theater. You can't take them shopping at Christmas. And now we're worried about them going to school. Very interesting culture we've evolved into.
But again, when we do get reports like this, we all cringe. Because it's the last thing you want to see happen at any business or any home, and especially at an elementary school, when we know the ages of the people who are involved. And we send our kids off to school every single day here in this country, hoping that they will be in the best hands. And then sadly, from time to time, these terrible situations do crop up.
The virus is childhood trauma.
The metaphor we use is a record player, old-time vinyl records, and you know, what we used to do in the olden days is you put a needle on the record and you play a song, you know, and the needle's going around on the record. And if you play a song, you know, 15,000 times because you're 14 years old and you love, you know, Stairway to Heaven, what happens is it actually starts to wear a groove in the record. And I might be playing a different song on the record, and then suddenly accidentally bumps the table, and what happens is the needle goes, and it lands right in that deep groove. And then maybe the groove is so deep that it gets to the end of the song and it just sort of skips back into the song, right? So that's all great if it's your favorite song. But what if it's the trauma groove, right? What if it's the fear song? And that's the groove that's really deep, because what fires together wires together. And that's the wiring. That's trauma in a way. It kind of wears a groove in the brain in super simplistic terms. Then I can be just fine. I'm doing okay, and then my classmate bumps me and suddenly, oh, like I'm in the fear response.
It's something that we may not know that the person sitting next to us may have experienced. And so how do we create a safe environment that is responsive to those needs?
Epidemiological research tells us that 89% of us are going to experience some sort of trauma by the time we grow old and die. 89% of us, that's pretty much all of us, with the norm being multiple traumas, complex trauma, chronic trauma.
If you ignore what's going on with students and their lives outside of school, then there'll be an increase in negative behavior. There's more conflict. They'll feel less connected to the school community. They won't achieve academically as well as they could, and I think they will not be happy, and the community will not be happy as a result of that. And then more teacher burnout, and then a lot more staff turnover, which is not good for anybody at a school community.
Racism, sexism, homophobia actually can be experienced as traumas in and of themselves. And if we ignore that idea, we miss the boat around trying to address trauma. Because, for example, when we think about trauma, sometimes we think about things like family violence, community violence. But when you add on top of that, if you're a person of color, or you are LGBTQ, or you walk around in a place where you have that looming threat that somehow this other person's safety and well-being isn't quite as important. No, let me start that over. You have this feeling that my safety and well-being is not quite as important as this other person's safety and well-being because of an accident of birth, right? Color of my skin, who I love, how I talk, how I walk. That looming threat that sometimes gets really concretized, and you see that, unfortunately, fairly regularly every day, is another form of potential trauma. Under-resourced communities are disproportionately affected by things like community violence, and that sort of chronic trauma tends to make it hard for kids to feel safe and supported and engaged in school if that doesn't get addressed.
The reach of the childhood trauma can be minimized, and those affected can be healed. In the absence of care, the effects will build and worsen over time, leading to deep illness and the risk of serious disability or death. Now, imagine your task is to prevent its spreading, minimize its influence, and bring the greatest health to the greatest number of people. Where do you begin? Simply targeting those most obviously impacted will not be enough. Because its impact may be difficult to detect, you may not know who has been exposed, who is in need of the most support, and who may regain health with no intervention. The world of public health has taught us that the best line of defense is a large-scale community-wide effort.
Even if you've not spent a lot of time around horses, you know that if a horse were bucking and jumping around and freaking out, you would not approach that horse with your finger out and your voice loud, right? You'd be much likely to use a soft tone of voice. You're not going to approach. You're going to only touch if invited. Like you're going to be very gentle, right? And that's kind of what we're asking for people when you're talking to someone else whose rider is clearly off their horse, whether that's a kid or a grown-up, is that you want to be thinking about your own regulation in that moment, your own calmness, so that you can help that person first and foremost get the rider on the horse.
Trauma-informed education has been revolutionizing the way teachers and administrators approach trying to improve the performance of students who are experiencing adverse circumstances, and oftentimes other students as well. They're new, they're innovative, and they're validating what they're already doing. Most teachers are already using a trauma-informed approach, they just don't see it that way. And so by giving them this information, it validates the work that they've been doing. It gives them an understanding of why certain things work for them.
HEARTS, that's an interesting acronym. I think that it is healthy environments and response to trauma in schools. And our HEARTS program is a unique partnership that we had a couple years ago that we still continue in a different way. But HEARTS program was really trying to look at how could we make schools a place that we were trauma sensitive and trauma informed, to really take into account everything that we're doing, and to how can we train our staff, how can we really have this lens of how we approach student behavior, how we approach what they need in terms of their learning, in terms of their all-around developmental growth.
6 principles are understanding stress and trauma, cultural humility and responsiveness, safety and predictability, compassionate, dependable relationships, resilience and social emotional learning, and empowerment and collaboration.
It starts with this foundational understanding of what trauma-informed work is, what these practices are, and then from there understanding where people need to learn a little bit more about a particular aspect of that work. So it's a universal model, but it's also very individualized in terms of being able to meet the needs of the staff and of the students.
I thought I was going to be having to learn a lot of new information, but it was more just taking a different bend on certain practices that we, in simple little phrases that we can add to our current practice, that made it feel like, oh, this is something manageable and definitely worthwhile.
It's something that you will constantly see the benefits of in the long term and also in the short term. Before we implemented trauma-informed practices, a common statement that teachers would say is, I just want to be a teacher. And now after implementing trauma-informed practices, we don't have teachers saying that. We have teachers saying, I think this might be what's happening for that student, instead of get this student out of my class.
The thing that teachers like the most about it is that we give people strategies that will help them all day in whatever situation they're in. Not just with our kids, but also with when they're talking to another teacher or when they're talking to administrators. I think that we talk about ways to work on your own personal stress and arousal, and that it's something they can take in their pocket, something that they can go with, that they feel like we help them do something.
How do you recognize when, like, oh my gosh, as a teacher, even though I might not have experienced my own trauma, working with trauma-impacted people actually has an effect on me. So to be able to name that, and teachers go, oh my gosh, that's what's been happening to me, right? And then to be able to say, and there's something you can do about it. We can help you with that. And there's many things that you can do just in your daily practice that can make it better. That gets people really excited.
It's solving problems and behavioral issues and helping students progress academically in a way that they weren't before these practices were implemented. The biggest changes that I've seen are the way that adults view behavior at the school. I think that they're looking at kids and they're not thinking what's wrong with you. They're taking the stance of what's happened to you, what can I do to support you, how can we strengthen our relationships so that we won't be having the same struggles in the classroom. And I think it gives kids language to explain why they're feeling what they're feeling. It teaches them skills on how to regulate their emotions, to put a name to the feelings that they're having in their body. And I think that that's been a really powerful change in the community. Instead of kids just like blowing out and screaming and tantruming, they have strategies that they can use to calm themselves down, places they can go in the classroom and outside of the classroom to support themselves emotionally. And I think that it's also helps teachers understand why the behavior is happening so that they can not think that it's about them and that they're failing the students, but that they can have different strategies to support them.
In a scenario such as that described here, given the immense personal and societal costs, along with the responsiveness to treatment and environmental changes, our efforts should go toward building healthy environments to counteract the virus's influence, to forge positive outcomes.
I was working in a non-public school, and a child was being referred for reassessment, but instead of looking at him as continuing to need the service, we noticed that he had been doing very well over the last couple of years. And when I look back at the original assessment that identified him as having an emotional condition, I noticed that there were several things that had happened to him at the time. So instead of just reevaluating him and continuing the idea that he had an emotional condition, we took another look and realized that the reason he was having these behaviors in the past was because of what had happened to him, not that there was something wrong with him. And the school system and the individuals working with him worked vigorously to return him to his neighborhood school. So instead of taking a disability approach or a discipline approach with either of these children, we took a distress approach. We said, what happened to you? And would it be normal for anybody who had these things happen to them to have these kinds of emotional and social reactions to things that were going on? That led to us taking a different approach, which we felt had a lot more success than the traditional approach of what's wrong with you, identifying him as a disability or a discipline problem, and then reacting to it in that way. All teachers, all educators need to know about trauma-informed education, not for specific individuals, not for children who come up who are having discipline problems, but for all children and other professionals in the building. It's a whole school approach. It's not about the therapist doing therapy down the hallway. It's about everybody pitching in and understanding what's going on and providing supports to individual children.
We're not going to try to tell you how to do your job. You know how to do your job. We're going to try to help rejuvenate why you got into this business in the first place, to teach. We're going to try to help increase the amount of instructional time, teaching time you have with your students, and decrease the amount of time you got to spend on like disciplinary difficulties or kids getting escalated because they've been accidentally knocked into survival brain by a trauma reminder, and then they've escalated and they've derailed your ability to teach. Right? We're going to try to get in front of that and head that off. We saw a 32% decrease in disciplinary referrals to the office. We saw a 43% decrease in like physically aggressive incidents that students were engaging in. That was just after 1 year. And after 5 years, there was an 87% total decrease in disciplinary referrals to the office, and an 86% decrease in violent incidents, physical aggression incidents. We saw a big decrease in out-of-school suspensions after 5 years. They saw a 95% decrease in out-of-school suspensions just from doing this work. Now, I'm not going to say that was all about us. They also implemented other things like restorative practices, PBIS. But this lens got people excited about doing those things. It's almost like it's the why. Why would you bother creating a school community? Why would you bother putting the time into creating a safe, supportive school community? Why do you bother doing restorative practices? Well, because when you put a trauma-informed lens on it, what it does is it means that those practices work not only for the kids it always works for, but the kids that we otherwise maybe lose because they get pushed out of school. for the teachers that we otherwise maybe lose because they're so stressed out. So it gives me a lot of hope.
What gives me hope about this is that we have seen a change and we have seen an impact. I think we've seen people ask questions about student needs and student behaviors that they weren't asking before. And I think when they ask those questions, we see that they're understanding what might be happening for that student, and they have more empathy and compassion for what might be going on. And I think that allows them to ultimately be more effective in their role in supporting these students growing as individuals.
Having that one adult that they can connect with, I think is so powerful, and I've seen that, my 4 years here as principal.
That it is something that can really, that it has some teeth and it can really make an impact and has made an impact, and so my hope is that it's not just another initiative in education.
The success I've seen with students, as well as just the common language that's been developed, and that it's been going this long for 7 years. I think that people and the schools don't do things for that long unless it works.
What we've found is that teachers are very frustrated with trying to deal with challenging students. And traditional approaches to educating them and controlling their behavior and motivating them have not been particularly effective. So when we give teachers the tools and methods and understanding of what a trauma-informed approach looks like, then they want to use these methods. They want to do better with these children. Teachers go into education so they can try to improve children's performance, and sometimes teachers like the most challenging students because they're the ones that really demonstrate success over time. So the teacher's role is the same as it's always been, to educate children and to support them and to have them be motivated to do well in school. And so by using these techniques, we have all of those outcomes: better educational outcomes, better relationships between children and adults, and improved motivation and engagement, so children realize that investing in themselves turns into success for them.
Is getting people to understand that it isn't, again, just those traumatized people over there, but it's all of us. We're all kind of in this together. That is the call to action.
And so that whether you're the classroom teacher, whether you're the principal, whether you're the lunch lady, I think, really being that consistent, friendly person, positive, and just really making that connection with the students. I think that's what's made this community really, really strong.
Keep pushing and not give up, because it is worth all the blood, sweat, and tears in the end.
There's a lot of hope around this.